Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Which means that magic is everywhere.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, my weird dad's weird podcast about weird movies.
Hello, and welcome to Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Begley, your host. And this time, Ronald Dzerigian and I will be talking about Dario Argento's 1977 film, Suspiria.
Roses are red, violets are blue, but the iris is the flower that will mean the end of it.
You can run from Suspiria. Suspiria. You can hide from Suspiria. Suspiria. But you cannot escape Suspiria. The only thing more terrifying than the last 12 minutes of Suspiria are the first 92.
Jessica Harper stars as Susie Banyan, an American dancer who travels to Freiburg, Germany to study at the Tanz Dance Academy. The Tanz Academy was established by Helena Marcos, who was suspected of being a witch. A series of brutal murders and suspicions about the strange goings-on of the teachers at the academy inspire Susie and her friend Sarah to investigate. Well, we had an unfortunate snafu that I didn't realize had happened until I started editing, or just listening to this portion of my discussion with Ronnie, and we had some pretty serious tech issues, some audio issues, towards the latter half of this discussion, about the hour-and-a-half mark of our total discussion, which was broken up into 2 episodes. I have heard some pretty crappy Skype recordings on different podcasts. Happened to listen to one today that wasn't all that great, but you could at least understand the guest. And in this case, it was just a lot of dropout, and I kept thinking, was one of us hitting the mute button? What happened here? I don't know if it was just the length of the discussion, his microphone input, possibly, but tons of dropout, 5 to 10 second sections of just dead silence where he or I were talking mostly on his end, unfortunately. So that kind of leads to a one-sided discussion on here. I edited what I could together as best as I could, so there will be a little bit more funky edits than usual, where I'm piecing together things that may have been said a minute or so apart that kind of still connected together. It's unfortunate. It's really my first big technical issue, other than me accidentally erasing the ends of sentences or the ends of sections of audio and not being able to retrieve them. So the next time I have to do a Skype interview, solely Skype interview, I will take measures to ensure that that doesn't happen again by splitting up the discussion. Okay, let's get into this. So, Ronnie, when was the first time that you saw Suspiria, and what did you think?
Well, I'd seen the cassette at the movies in the Tower District, the cover, but I never got around to watching it until I went to see it with you and a few other buddies of ours at the Satellite Student Union at Fresno State.
I didn't realize that was the first time.
That was my first time seeing it.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah.
I have to thank you for reminding me of when that happened, because I had it in my head that it was when I was still going to school there. So early 90s. I thought it was after I got back from London and was working in the library there, because I remember, this is a weird memory associated with this. I remember being up in the library and whoever I was with, we were talking about going and seeing The Shining. So I guess this all happened during an October in like 96 or 97.
Yeah, that would be about it.
They were showing horror movies during the month, and there was a girl who was a friend of a friend or an associate of an associate who refused to go see The Shining because she had had some personal trauma involving her parents. Like her dad had abused her mom, and so the movie was a trigger for her. And for some reason, I always think about that, and I think that I was in the library because that's where I was working. But anyway, yeah, so that was, I had seen the movie, I'm pretty sure before I went to London. So sometime in the late 80s, and it wasn't, same type of deal. Always saw the box at our local video store, and it was that kind of yellowish gold cover, sort of, what's that French art style, with all the flowers and
Art Nouveau.
Yes, and for some reason it's probably not even what it looks like, but that was what would stick in my head.
Yeah.
And the title, of course, and finally took a chance. I think my sister and I watched it, and it was mind-blowing, to say the least. I hadn't seen anything like that, hadn't heard anything like that.
Thank you. Hearing is, the movie is all about seeing and hearing. Like, all films should be that way, but it floored me. And getting to see it for the first time on the big, I wouldn't call it a big screen in that space, but a large screen was a blessing. I don't know. I never had the experience of seeing it on our generation size television set. Mm-hmm. Which I'm sure would have been similar to like watching Eraserhead, where you just don't get to see everything.
Because it would have been pan and scan or just cropped, and you're going to miss all the stuff creeping in the corners, and just the beautiful cinematography and all the colors are going to be washed out on video anyway. So yeah, you lucked out. It was probably a 16 millimeter print, but that's better than VHS any day of the week. So
it was cool. It was really a cool thing. I hadn't seen, the equivalent experience may have been like Blue Velvet for me. Like, I hadn't seen something that creepy and beautiful probably since seeing Blue Velvet. And it really made a huge... I also get overly enthusiastic, so I felt like that the same way about the movie Rushmore. It's like, this is what movies should do. Like, this is what they should be. But I had that experience with seeing Suspiria there.
I think the point to Blue Velvet is valid because there's little context for American audiences for that kind of film. It's they're not made the same way, just by virtue of not having a soundtrack, or not recording while you're filming. Kids kind of get used to, if they watch any kung fu movies or any Saturday afternoon movies on the horror movie channel, you still maybe don't recognize why it's done that way. I remember watching kung fu movies and going, why I remember watching Battle of the Planets
Yeah.
And wondering why it sounded strange and why the mouth and the words didn't match up completely.
Yeah. We had action theaters, and wasn't it action theater and, kung fu movies and Godzilla movies? By the time I saw Suspiria, this is just a normal experience
But it's still off-putting, and it's part of, the charm of those movies, and you realize, okay, well, this is how the Italian movie industry worked. Mm-hmm. They rarely recorded the sound on set or on location, and they generally used actors from all parts of the world, and they all spoke their own language, which just really boggles my mind when I think, and I've heard it, and I know that this is how it's done. And I just think, boy, that must have been hard for the actors. How do you know when to step in and say your lines if you don't understand what the other person is saying? And obviously they work it out, but that still just makes my brain hurt a little bit when I start thinking about that. But just the idea of not only how they filmed, but their approach to storytelling is so different. If you're experiencing a film like this for the first time, you don't have in your head, okay, well, in Italian horror movies, they don't really care about plot. They don't care about plot holes. They don't care about continuity. It's all about feel and style and look and sound. And so Suspiria probably was one of the bigger Italian hits because of the look of it and the soundtrack and the misgivings of the strange dubbing and all these other things don't really matter as much. If you started with, obviously people were watching Argento films prior to this, but I think about it for my generation, or you're about a generation behind me. This is a lot of people's introduction to Italian horror. And
it's definitely mine.
Yeah, and so then you can go back and you see it, and it's even more apparent in earlier films of his, or in earlier Italian horror with Mario Bava, and then it becomes part of the style, and it's not so strange, and it gives you that little surreal feel to it, like everything's a little bit off. This isn't quite right. It's not very realistic. Which again is the point, and especially in Suspiria, since it's supposed to be like a fairy tale, again, which I really didn't recognize as a younger person, that this is, grown up fairy tale. She's Snow White or any other number of fairy tale heroines. Yeah, it's a little bit disorienting, which I always love in movies, and hard to wrap your head around. So yeah, comparison to Blue Velvet makes sense to me because that can give you the same kind of feeling, disorienting and surreal and dark, and everything's under the surface and what's going on here. And so
well, I think that for me at least, I was already familiar with David Lynch, and so Eraserhead was already something I'd seen a lot of. I'd seen Elephant Man. That doesn't really count here in this, but I'd seen Blue Velvet, and I'd seen Dune. I had this familiarity with this territory that's surprising in Suspiria. I don't know if I had not seen any David Lynch movies before this, if I would have liked Suspiria as much, but yeah, he got me ready for it.
And then if you're like me, and I think you are a little bit, and you get obsessed with things, this leads to trying to watch as many of these movies as you can, and that became kind of an exercise in frustration and futility because a lot of his movies weren't readily available, or they were available in really crappy, hacked up versions. And I remember I've got my Psychotronic Encyclopedia film list. There are a ton of Argento movies in there. And this was back, when I was going to the video store all the time, and it was hard. They were hard to find. Part of that was because they were under different titles, and it just depended on what title you read about. But I know that one of the stores, not the one that we usually went to, but another one had Deep Red, but it was called The Deep Red Hatchet Murders, or one of the other variations on the title. It just, they weren't the best VHS covers or boxes, and I'm sure the copies themselves weren't very good either. These were companies cranking out cheapo crap to to make a buck, but I don't think I rented it at some point. I rented as many as I could find. Creepers, of course, was available, but it was chopped up as well. You're looking at most of his movies with a good 20 or so minutes missing. And I think Suspiria is one of the few that kind of came through unscathed. I know I've read that there was 8 minutes cut, but that may have been when it played theatrically or something. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I can't recognize any difference between the DVD that I have now and the movie that I watched decades ago. So other than the opening narration being different and, the dubbing, which is just sort of universal for American releases, I don't think there's any difference to the original film.
You mentioned the psychotronic book a lot in your podcast, and that reminds me that my dad didn't have that, but he had the Midnight Movies book. But I would just, obsess over the films in that book, and I'm fairly confident I had already read up on Argento movies, especially Suspiria, by the time we went to go see it. And thank goodness for that book, for opening up that world.
That's an experience that a lot of us had. I had the cult movies books, volumes 1 and 3, and then my big horror movie. And you read about these books, and they didn't care about spoilers or anything. I mean, you basically got the whole idea of the movie well before you ever saw it.
Yeah.
But that was what brought you to watching it, was reading an interesting review or critique of the film without having it just available right on your TV or something. So there's been a lot of talk on Twitter about spoilers with movies, like with Endgame and with Game of Thrones. I don't have a dog in that fight because I grew up having movies spoiled for me without really realizing they were being spoiled.
Our generation grew up with spoilers. It's a natural occurrence.
Right. And, there was always the gimmicks of like Alfred Hitchcock, don't discuss the end of this movie with your friends for Psycho or whatever. And so there was that side of it too. But if you're looking at a book that was written in the 80s that's talking about movies from the 60s, that people are going to kind of assume, well, you've maybe had a chance to see this, or if you haven't, who gives a shit? Here's the rundown of the movie. I think I mentioned this on an episode. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film. I still see it like a puzzle. Like when you buy a puzzle, you see the completed picture on the front. It's not a mystery what the picture is. The fun is figuring out how it all fits together. Yeah. And so even with the movie, if it's been spoiled, quote unquote, spoiled for me, knowing the ending, I think, okay, well, how are they going to get there? And that's perfectly enjoyable too. So I know we're going off on a tangent but
it's an important tangent. Like you can have the ending to Suspiria, both the remake and the original. You can have that ending spoiled, and still the journey is totally worth it. It's not like Usual Suspects where I said suspects like an accent. It's not like Usual Suspects where you have like the ending is spoiled or Sixth Sense, where it's like, that screws up your entire viewing of the film. It's not like that at all. And I think movies like Suspiria, you can be told the ending, but the journey to get there is going to be just as adventurous, if not more, as that big discovery you might make at the end.
Or make in the middle that will come back for the end. I get stressed out sometimes when I'm watching something with a big mystery in it, and I actually spoil movies for myself a lot of the time because I need to relax and go, okay, is this person going to die or are they going to make it? And I will look it up on Wikipedia and spoil it for myself so that I can enjoy the rest of the movie. So back to the movie and the beginning of the film, and this is something, I kind of and I mentioned this on the Howling episode, and I mentioned it in other episodes, I kind of watch movies, even to this day, I think the term is passive viewer, where I'm not watching it critically and I'm not watching it cynically. I just, let myself go, kind of watch it as a kid or like in a naive state. And so it took me forever to realize at the beginning of the film when she's walking through the airport that the music starts and stops with the opening of the doors.
Whoa, I never even noticed that.
Okay, well, I'm not the only one then. I always got kind of anxious because I thought something's going to happen when the doors close, like it's on her head or something.
That's brilliant.
It's like, okay, so you're in the airport. This is the normal world. As soon as those doors open, guess what? You're in Fantasyland. And so it's a great little cue to start the film. And then once she's outside, we're in Alice in Wonderland or Snow White or whatever.
I was going to say it's full on, through the looking glass.
Oh yeah.
Nod there.
Literally.
That changes everything for me. I hope you know that. I'm going to have to go watch it again.
As she walks through the door, there's a poster for the Black Forest. I don't know if it's supposed to be a movie or a play, or if it's the performance that the Tanz Academy is practicing for. But, that's another little... Okay. Why are we in Germany? Well, because so many fairy tales were written by the Brothers Grimm in Germany. And
so many of those take place in the Black Forest.
And as she's driving to the academy, she passes through the beautiful woods. I always love at the beginning when she's driving in with the shadow on the tree there. And that it makes me think of other Argento movies where there's always a little clue kind of hidden, like in Deep Red, when he's walking through the hall and he's like, something was different about this hallway then. There was something different about this picture. You find out later that it wasn't a picture, it was a mirror, and there was a reflection of the psycho lady that's been doing all the killings. So I don't know who that is supposed to be in the tree, if it's the person that ends up attacking the student that leaves later on, or if it's just a spooky little thing. But I always like little touches like that. And then the confusing part for me always, and I don't know how many people this confused, but the same thing happens in Inferno, where we have Jessica Harper coming in. She gets there, there's a student leaving, and then she goes off. Jessica Harper has to find some place to stay, and we leave her, and then we follow this other character. And I think the first few times I saw this, not being as familiar with Jessica Harper, I guess, I kind of thought it was her. You have to remember that we're watching this on video, on crappy VHS copies. It threw me off. And this is part of the Italian storytelling. Like, okay, don't worry about her. We'll get back to her. We're on to this girl because we have to have this weird murder happen in this apartment.
And you have to. I think it's important for good storytelling for us to be thrown off track a little bit. Whose path am I supposed to be following here? But that's another way of building tension.
Yeah, or just confusing the audience.
which helps build tension.
Right. And they do virtually the same thing at the beginning of Inferno, where we follow this gal and she goes into the hole in the bottom of her apartment complex, and then we travel to another city in another country, but the girl that's there looks exactly like the girl that we were just with, and it's confusing because you don't know, wait, was that the same girl? And it doesn't help that everything's dubbed, and part of that different style of storytelling that kind of goes from film to film.
Probably unintentional on Argento's part, but at the same time it does something, creates a skewed perspective for the audience. Maybe he did do it on purpose, thinking about it now. But if not, like if this is just, I like the way these two actresses look, so just so happens that they both fit the same kind of description. But that kind of through the looking glass problem, like that skewed perspective or that.
Or just even doppelgangers or.
Yeah, doppelgangers.
Or, that happens in fairy tales all the time, where, or someone in sheep's clothing or just confusing people for each other. And then I mentioned the other day, it's also kind of interesting that the characters' names, the friend in Suspiria is named Sarah, and the friend who does the investigating in Inferno is named Sarah. So I don't know, it's all these doubles and confusing switches between characters who are similar. And
well, that ties into the Black Forest thing, or any forest really. You enter the forest, and that idea you can't see the forest for the trees. That is a scary scenario. At each turn, you see something familiar, but it's not what it was.
And you get turned around very easily.
Which is what's happening in, all the Argento films I've seen. That happens. It's like you're entering familiar territory, but it's changing around you.
It's funny you mentioned, the Lynch stuff, because I just saw this in my notes. Sorry to interrupt, but the brutal killing at the beginning, the famous stabbing of the exposed heart, really reminded me of the vivisection of the baby in Eraserhead. And I made a note of that. I'm like, well, how often do you see exposed organs being violently stabbed like that?
Yeah.
All that stuff at the beginning, and then throughout, we always have somebody being pushed through glass. I mean, it happens in Deep Red.
Mm-hmm.
It happens multiple times in Suspiria. I'm trying to think of another example of an Argento film, but he likes pushing women's heads through glass. And I don't know what that says about him, but, we
lot, probably.
The whole, misogyny thing. Mm-hmm. But, the violence against women is pretty brutal in these movies, but, they're the main characters. So,
yeah,
I know what. There is one in Phenomena, too, at the beginning. So decapitations by glass and all that. And again, it kind of goes to... I don't know who it was that said, maybe it was Argento. He wants the deaths to reflect things that would happen to normal people. Like, you can understand being cut by glass, maybe not having your head pushed through a window like that by a green-eyed, hairy-armed beast. Normal objects can inflict pain on you during your normal day. And I don't know if it was him or another director that said that, but it kind of works for this. For broken glass is like when we break a glass in our house, it's like, okay, everybody make sure your feet aren't bare, put shoes on, got to vacuum and sweep until every little piece is picked up or whatever. So,
well, like that trough of barbed wire or whatever that, it's like skin injuries are things that we can really relate to.
That's another instance of not convenient storytelling, but why in the world would there be a room full of barbed wire in a dance academy?
It doesn't make any sense.
But it leads to a really creepy, awesome scene. So, this is our goal here, is to make you cringe and freak you out and build up the tension and the stuff. And that girl was suffering during that. So whether it was real barbed wire or not, if you've ever had string or wire wrap around you, that becomes kind of frightening for the actress as well as the character.
That just seems like a terrifying scene to have shot for that actress. Like, I would never want to. And really, and we're saying barbed wire, but that's a gentler type of wire. This is razor wire, right? I mean, like just piles of razor wire, and that stuff it's terrifying. But the also the breaking of the glass, if we're sticking to the Alice in Wonderland thing, venturing into that territory that exists on the other side of the glass is dangerous. And if you break it, then what could come of that, right?
Yeah, and there's multiple shots of mirrors, characters in mirrors, but that's a good comparison to make. And, that sort of gets tropey after a while. There's always mirrors in horror movies and what's on the other side.
But what does it mean to be a witch?
Well, as a believer in the material world and a psychiatrist to boot, I'm convinced that the current spread of belief in magic and the occult is part of mental illness. Bad luck isn't brought by broken mirrors, but by broken minds.
When I think about this movie, of course, I think about the music and I think about the colors, but I also think about Udo Kier and his little scene here. It's one of those odd, it kind of goes to the writing and the story, because he's explaining to Jessica Harper's character, why am I forgetting her name? Susie Bannion. So he's explaining that, witchcraft, we've kind of figured out this is all mental illness. He says, well, my buddy here, Dr. Milius, is an expert on this, and he'll explain it better.
Mm-hmm.
And then the old guy comes in and was basically saying, well, no, yeah, there's evil everywhere.
What do witches do?
They are malefic, negative and destructive. Their knowledge of the art of the occult gives them tremendous powers. They can change the course of events and people's lives, but only to do harm. Their goal is to accumulate great personal wealth, but that can only be achieved by injury to others. They can cause suffering, sickness, and even the death of those who, for whatever reason, have offended them. Which means that magic is everywhere and all over the world. It's a recognized fact. Always.
Basically contradicts everything that Udo Kier was just saying. But that scene always makes me laugh.
I wonder why that scene was kept.
It's the exposition dump. It's the explanation of what's going on. That's the point of that scene. It's maybe not necessary, but it's Udo Kier.
Yeah.
So why are you questioning that?
Yeah, we should never question Udo.
But I love it. I was trying to figure out, because there was a shot towards the end of her discussion with the older doctor where it's basically a 2-shot of them straight on, and there's all this glass in the background. Again, back in the days when you used to watch a crappy version of this, it worked a little better, because I always thought, well, how come you can't see the crew? And, they're filming straight into glass, reflective glass. And I noticed when I was watching it yesterday that everybody's behind a big black piece of wood or something, and there's a little rectangle cut out of the middle where the camera was obviously positioned. So thanks to HD, I finally figured out how to accomplish that.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
That's one of the wonderful things about digital special effects, is that you can film an entire scene now in a room of mirrors. And
the remake, there is, one of the dance rooms is just absolutely covered in mirrors, and there's no crew, camera, anything apparent in any of the reflections. So I think that's one of the best ways you could use CGI or computer enhancement to, well, how can we film in a room of mirrors? Well, we don't have to worry about it. For me, that's more important for CGI, is to kind of excise things as opposed to adding them.
Props to Argento, because he worked around so much glass in this movie, in several of his movies, right? There's a lot of glass and mirrors, so it's like, that's hard. He couldn't just cut that out with a computer.
You had to figure it out.
You had to figure it out.
Back to, the whole Joe Dante thing. You figure it out, or you don't do it, or you do it sloppy. Which option are you going to do? Well, you figure it out. There was a shot that kind of stuck out to me when I was watching it yesterday, where Susie and Sarah are in, I think, Susie's room, and of course she's being drugged. All the food and drink that they're giving her is making her fall asleep every night. And Sarah's hearing the footsteps. This is their big, Nancy Drew type of scenario where they're trying to figure out where the teachers go every night, and she's counting the footsteps. And there's a shot, it's way up high, the camera's way up high, and it's positioned behind a light bulb. It's a very cinematic shot. It can pull you out of a scene. You're like, why are we way up here and behind a light bulb, and the characters are down there? But then at some point, Sarah hears footsteps approaching the room, and she shuts off the light, and then the camera finally moves, and it's like, that kind of stuff is what Argento did so expertly. And it's not crazy like a lot of that really low angle stuff he did in Deep Red, and all the close-ups with the turntable, a lot of tracking shots that are really low on the ground. And then he has the whole, I think it's like 3-minute long scene in Tenebrae outside of an apartment window where it just keeps going like from, the roof to this window to that window. And it's not as apparent in Suspiria, but those little touches, those little really great widescreen compositions are amazing in this movie. And it doesn't hurt that, all the background, the wallpaper everywhere is really, really loud and crazy. I don't know if you remember when this is kind of another confusing part where she's shipped off to live with Olga, the kind of nasty girl who says that their names are the names of snakes.
Susie. Sarah. I once read that names which begin with the letter S are the names of snakes.
And her black and white wallpaper is just so jarring. And then all the stuff in the girl's apartment at the beginning of the movie where Pat Hingle gets killed, and it's overwhelming to the eyes. And then on top of that, you have the score.
If we're comparing films to desserts, Suspiria, you're talking about how the set design is overwhelming. This is like a dessert that's too much. Mm-hmm. And the soundtrack, of course, is too rich. It's like there's too much frosting. But that's exactly why this works and exactly why it's so terrifying, and what I loved about the nods to this in the remake. Maybe this is just my relationship to the film, but that soundtrack is legendary, and almost so much so that it's more it carries more popular culture value than the film itself, I think. I don't know how many times I've gone to like a party or something and someone put on the Goblin soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
And the film is iconic, but I think the soundtrack lives a separate life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've never heard it outside of the movie, but watching the extras, the composers were talking about their intent, and it was the music doesn't really relate to what's happening in the scenes, which can really work, and in this case it does, or it can be a really big mistake. But also that they intended, and I'm trying to kind of quote as directly as I can, they intended for the rhythm to be almost irritating, and that describes it perfectly, because you're thinking just in the early scenes when that girl Pat leaves and then she's at her friend's apartment building and those drums start going, and it's incessant.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point of like, please stop. And it goes over that line, maybe just a little bit, and then it eases up. And there are a few spots in the movie where there is no score at all. And so then when it comes back up, it's just like, oh, yeah, here we go again. And that percussion is so loud and so insistent and gets to the point of being annoying. And I think, it probably is something that turned a lot of people off. But it, if you're there for it, it works so amazingly well.
It's that claustrophobic thing. Like you're in a room, you're feeling trapped already, and yet there's this incessant pounding, this noise, and it's not like any other horror soundtrack. If you take it from the film, it's creepy, sure, but also it's essentially like noise rock. And that's definitely, along with like the colors and the interior spaces, definitely adds to like the decadent claustrophobia that makes Suspiria so scary. I mean, of course, this is also like Argento's signature. Everything is, the reds are saturated. Everything's like syrupy and beautiful, even when it's gross. In other words, the music is syrupy and beautiful and gross.
Yeah, it doesn't really do much half-assed in at least his 70s films. So
yeah, well, we've talked about his.
Yeah, we won't get into that. We're low on time, so we won't get into the 2000s movies. Other than to say, yeah, Mother of Tears has remained elusive for me as part of the trilogy. I did watch Inferno. It's I like it. It's not top tier Argento, and I know that quite a bit of it was filmed by Mario Bava because Argento was sick with hepatitis, which brings up one kind of really great point. And again, this kind of goes back to our discussion of the Howling and how you work around things. And the bulk of the movie is supposed to take place in New York, and the apartment building that's central to that story is obviously not in New York. But apparently Mario Bava created this amazing skyline out of milk cartons and cardboard. I really paid attention to it this time because I'm like, what? And because it never stood out to me before. And so I looked, and there's a daytime shot where it's a little more apparent that, this was matted out. And it's amazing.
Oh, man.
It looks so good.
I need to go back and look at that.
It's great. And at night, it's even better, of course, because it's dark and it's just little windows lit up, probably with 20-watt bulbs or something. But
That's
it's pretty
amazing.
fantastic. Yeah, it's how you figure it out.
This is how you figure it out.
And
this
make
is how
it work. And it
you-
works better than a matte painting. So, you have real things, and it's just perspective and how they shot it, and it comes across really well.
You can always tell if it's something that you can reach out and touch, and it adds to the realism, even if it's totally fake looking.
And one other thing about Inferno is that one of the characters' name is Kazanian, a nod to our Armenian brethren.
If Fresno shows up in a film, or if an Armenian shows up in a film, we take note.
Yep. And if Sid Haig shows up, and that covers both, that covers both of those. So
Exactly.
we have both seen the remake, and if I can speak for you real quickly, we both really enjoyed it.
I feel like it's like in honor of the original type of remake. It's a different film in a lot of ways, but I love that it honors the aesthetics of the original, that it honors similar camera work that Argento utilized. Even the Tom York soundtrack honors the Goblins soundtrack. To me, it accomplishes so. And then also, we're not going to give away any spoilers, but the ending is like a direct nod to the way the ending pans out in the original in so many ways.
I think a lot of the criticism that I've seen, not that it misses the point, but I felt that there were maybe more similarities to the original than a lot of other people felt. And I'm talking about maybe superficial things like character names.
Oh, yeah.
They're basically the same. We've got a new character with Dr. Klimper. I think that's his name, which is kind of a mashup of the Udo Kier and Dr. Milius, of the original, but he has a storyline, and it's a great storyline, and it adds depth to the film and adds that investigation, the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boy part of the film, which I always love. I love it when people investigate things in movies. So we hear about the investigation, and Sarah does some of that in the original, and Sarah does that in the remake, and then our Pat Hingle or Patricia Hingle character in both films kind of initiates that, but it's taken a little bit further. And I like the differences and the similarities. I like that it is muted as opposed to, garishly bright.
Yeah.
I like that their outfits are, I don't even know how to describe, it feels 70s to me, and it's not done how, not everybody's in flared jeans and poofy blouses. It's all these long country dresses, and that it's in Berlin as opposed to Freiburg. And so we have the wall there, and, that becomes significant, even if it's just subconscious significance that we've got a division here between the real world and the world of the witches. I like that it's basically all women in this one, except for the psychiatrist character. They're obviously, the characters are fleshed out way more than the original.
Yeah, you get to know them.
You've got a backstory with Susie in this one that's very interesting. It's not explored deeply, but it's interesting to have something to connect with, and it informs her story.
The Mennonite outfits, the Mennonite scenes was Ohio, right? Though it's like 5 minutes of the film, that is just gorgeous. There's set design, and then there's set design. You know what I mean? There's art direction and there's art direction. And in so many ways, I feel like this director sort of goes above and beyond. It's muted, but it still accomplishes the sort of decadence that Argento accomplishes, which is like, it's just, what better way to honor a classic than, to create the same kind of decadence, but in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think that the decadence comes through in how the witches live and how they're shown eating numerous times. They're a little bit more decked out than the girls that are staying there. To me, this is the right way to do a remake of a classic. Make it your own, but have all those strong connections to the first. I mean, it could have been a remake where it's like, well, it wasn't intended to be a remake, and they think, well, shit, we're doing a movie about a coven of witches in a dance studio. Maybe we better call it Suspiria.
Yeah.
Retcon everything to fit that. This was a deliberate remake and fashion after the original, but taken in really interesting ways. Having Jessica Harper show up at the end as his wife, as Dr. Klemper's wife, and that bothered some people, and I don't understand that.
Why would that bother anybody?
It's cheap, I guess. It's a cheap nod to the original, and I don't see it that way at all. And it lends the biggest emotional point of the movie. They could have had another actress do that, but it makes you kind of go, oh, there's Susie, there's the original Susie, and
that's right.
And then you forget about it, and she's not that character. She's this character, and let's move on. But I like also how they wrapped all the three mothers into it. I mean, that was obviously the inspiration for Argento to do this, but he doesn't really talk about it in that movie. It doesn't come up until Inferno, and then again in Mother of Tears. But here we have that all laid out, and like I told you when we talked a couple weeks ago, I really hope he does the other two movies.
That's what I think. I think in as I've been thinking about it since we talked last, I think that there are some definite indicators that this could continue, and I'm hoping that happens, because what a cool thing. I don't think we've had any trilogies remade, have we?
Yeah, I'm sure he has zero plans to do this, but it's one of my. Nice. In my imaginary world, he'll do all three, and they'll all be very interesting.
Can we talk about how cool Tilda Swinton is?
Yeah, if you want.
That's essentially it, though. I think that's all I can really say. Like,
playing that role of the Doctor, again, that was another thing that bothered people. It didn't bother me at all.
Didn't bother me either.
I like that character. I like that it's so fleshed out and gives us another viewpoint in the story. I think I like her role at the end the best.
Yeah, that was an amazing surprise.
I did want to bring up my one kind of nitpicky thing about the film is the way it was filmed at the end bothered me. The climax of the movie with that slow motion, I don't know, the herky-jerky stuff kind of bugged me. But other than that, that's like my one complaint about the film, and it's a stylistic thing, and some of the effects work in that scene at the end, which you mentioned as well.
It's like going from everything about the film up until this point is very practical, makeup effects, things feel very, even when the mirrored room scene with that one dancer who meets her end there, like, even though there's some digital effects happening there, it feels very real. It's like so much of what we're watching in the new Suspiria reminded me of Dogtooth, in that it's like whatever is happening violently to these characters feels very real. And then you get to the end, and the more I think about it, the more I enjoy sort of the outlandishness of the ending, but the blood, and I don't want to say too much, but like the blood, and as you said, the herky-jerky, it's hard to tell if it's fast forward or slow motion, blurry, digitized stuff happening, almost like everything's through a lens of water.
I don't mind that it's amped up. I don't mind so much. It's really purely technical stuff that bothers me about the end. I don't mind that we go from this kind of subdued thing to, batshit crazy in 5 minutes. It's really just being nitpicky about the look of it and the way it was filmed. Other than that, I like the end. I like that it's balls out, gory.
It could have been goopier.
Yeah, I would have preferred more guts on the floor and picking up body parts, which is in there, but I would have liked more of the gloop. Yeah, exactly.
It feels digital, which is the big difference between anything we'd seen in the film until this point. And so that I think is probably what you and I are both reacting to, which is it feels digital.
All right, buddy. Well, I think we're past your getting ready point. So thanks very much for joining me on these 2 episodes. And we'll do this again sometime, maybe for Rosemary's Baby or something like that.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And once again, Ronnie is on Instagram as Skelevator, SKELE_VADER. And you can buy his book, Rough Fire, at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or wherever else you buy fine literature. Please do me a favor and go and buy his book. It is amazing. I wanted to talk about the cast and the music a little bit more here and fill in some spots that either got cut out or that Ronnie and I didn't get to. He had a little bit shorter time towards the end of our talk to go over Suspiria, and of course we lost some of that. Jessica Harper, who stars as Susie Banyan and as Anka Kemperer, and I needed to correct that last name there. It is Kemperer, not Kemper. But Jessica Harper has been in a few genre films, such as The Evictors, which is kind of a folk horror haunted house. I think it takes place during the Depression. I was a little confused about the timeline in that movie. Interesting flick, which I think is on Prime currently. She was in the pseudo sequel to Rocky Horror Picture Show called Shock Treatment, which I have not seen. That was a very hard movie to track down back in my VHS days. I think it had something to do with music rights. She was in Phantom of the Paradise, one of Brian De Palma's early films, which I also have not seen. One of a few movies of his I have yet to catch. Stefania Cassini, who plays Sarah in Suspiria, was in a couple of those Andy Warhol quote-unquote produced films from the 70s, including Bad and Paul Morrissey's Blood for Dracula, which also stars Udo Kier, who plays Dr. Frank Mandel in Suspiria.
The occult.
And if you don't know about Udo Kier at this point, I'm not sure what to tell you. He's been in God knows how many movies, tons of horror films. I last saw him in the latest entry in the Puppet Master franchise, and I'm pretty sure he's been in a number of those. A couple of interesting old-time faces in this movie, and I just realized this, that the man who plays Dr. Milius in Suspiria, Rudolf Schindler, played Carl in The Exorcist.
Cunningham, bloody damn butchering Nazi pig.
Joan Bennett plays the headmistress, Madame Blanc, and her first screen credit dates back to 1916. She has nearly 100 credits to her name. She was in Dark Shadows, which was a childhood favorite of mine, which I need to watch, but it's a little bit disarming how many episodes there are, so I have yet to take a dive back into that. And then another interesting cast member is Alida Valli. I didn't realize I had seen her in other films before. She plays Miss Tanner in Suspiria, and then she also has a role in Inferno as a completely different character, as does Udo Kier. He plays somebody else entirely in Mother of Tears. Alida Valli was in a really, really great French film called Eyes Without a Face, which I had heard about for years. I don't think I had seen it until we got TCM, Turner Classic Movies, and I remember sitting there the whole time and thinking, man, I know that face. And it finally dawned on me at one point when I watched Suspiria. Oh, and of course with IMDb at the ready, I was able to figure out it was the same actress. Again, very long career, and been acting in movies since I think the 40s, maybe even earlier. And then one of the younger stars, or actors, maybe not the star, of Suspiria, the guy that plays the creepy little blonde-haired kid with the Dutch boy haircut, Jacopo Mariani, was also in Argento's Deep Red as the creepy little boy in that. So they like to use those little blonde kids in those Italian horror movies. I wanted to circle back real quick in regard to the score a little bit more, and just one point in particular, which I don't think I was really cognizant of until watching the extras on my 25th anniversary DVD. And I have watched those in the past, but for some reason just didn't pay attention after that when I was watching the movie. But there's a lot of vocalization that is in English, and I think I just always assumed the vocalization was in Italian, so I didn't pay attention to it. That kind of spells out what's going on in the movie. I mean, it's fairly obvious when they're saying witch or witches, but there's some other English dialogue throughout the score that I don't want to call spoilers, but gives you kind of the plot of the film.
The witch, her lies threatening murder, has gone to Ellen and Marcos, Isle of Mode. There are 3 witches on the school.
Granted, it's fairly buried in the tracks, and I think is supposed to work on more of a subconscious level, but I completely missed it in the God knows how many times I've watched it before. And whenever I think about the score, and actually whenever I think about Suspiria in general, I come back to one of my favorite modern horror movies that I have mentioned a number of times throughout episodes on Wake Up Heavy, and that is Peter Strickland's Berberian Sound Studio. And I was hoping to bring it up with Ronnie, and I didn't get to it, and I just wanted to touch on it real briefly here, because as I've mentioned on one episode or another, the movie that the Toby Jones character in Berberian Sound Studio is supposed to be mastering the sound for always makes me think of Suspiria, so it's kind of this circular thing. One makes me think of the other, Berberian makes me think of Suspiria, because it's all about witches, and even though it's not in a dance studio, it's in a convent, I believe. You never see any footage from the film. You only hear the dubbing and the sound effects and the music that are being added to the soundtrack, which is, as we discussed, how they did these Italian movies. And it's all about witches, and there's all these really violent descriptions of the murders and stuff that take place in that. And that kind of inspired me to finally go ahead and do a little appreciation episode of Berberian Sound Studio. So that should be up around the same time. It may even be up before, since I've got a lot more work to do on this. But I just wanted to touch on that real quick and say how these films, in my brain, work together as a beautiful double feature. So, hey, do that. Berberian Sound Studio is on Hulu. Suspiria is on Tubi right now, which is free with ads, but it's free. So, load them both up. And then one last thing about the original, I wanted to bring up Daria Nicolodi, who I think gets shut out a lot when people talk about Dario Argento's movies. Kind of like how Deborah Hill gets shut out of John Carpenter's early career. She was instrumental in a number of his early films as a co-script writer, and she acted in a number of them, was supposed to act in Suspiria, but was ill. And she formed the basic story that this was based on from dreams of hers and from a story that her grandmother told her about taking piano lessons at a school that was supposed to be run by witches, as well as a variety of fairy tales. But she also co-wrote Inferno. I'm pretty sure she wrote or co-wrote Deep Red, and she's just not brought up enough. It's always about Dario Argento and his direction. Like we know with Inferno, he didn't even direct a lot of that movie, so credit where credit is due. I think she kind of filled in a lot of the story for many of his movies. And then lastly here, a couple of things about the remake that I hope I'm not repeating either from this episode or the more modern horror episode that I liked about the remake, the kind of more in-depth story that we have, and how being in West Berlin as opposed to Freiburg adds the whole idea, and we see it in the movie, of the Berlin Wall, which makes me think about another movie, another horror movie, amazing horror movie, called Possession, that takes place right on the Berlin Wall as well. And how in Suspiria there's this whole sub-story about the political upheaval that's happening at the time. And I'm not informed enough about that situation to really discuss it, but how that kind of bubbles up through the rest of the story and informs a lot of the Pat Hingle's character's motivations, just gives another layer to the film, which I think is missing from the original. There's not a whole lot of subtext in the original. There's not a whole lot of side stories, and when they're dealt with, they're really perfunctory. And here we have all different threads with different characters throughout, and levels of politics, levels of gender politics, and a lot more dancing. There's one dance scene in the original, and there's 3 or 4 full dance scenes or practices, and it becomes a part of the ritual, which I think is a pretty genius move. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Wake Up Heavy, Season 2, Episode 2 on Dario Argento's Suspiria. Either prior to this or shortly thereafter, I'll have that little appreciation episode on Barbarian Sound Studio. And then, as per usual, I'm not sure what's coming up in June or in the next few weeks. We shall see. I don't think I've done a long spiel in a while, so please head on over to iTunes. Even if you even if you listen to this on another platform, please head over to iTunes, rate and review Wake Up Heavy if you haven't already done so, and I'm pretty sure you haven't, because there's only 4 up there. And or if you are on SoundCloud, you can repost any and or all of the episodes, and that helps get the word out as well and garner plays. If you are fairly active on there and you have playlists, feel free to add any episode to any playlist and buy some stickers. I've got a link to my Big Cartel web shop. That's the only source of income I have, and I have not sold one since I've had them since probably September of last year. We'll get into all that stuff when I do the Happy Birthday to Me /anniversary episode sometime in August. And yes, the Goblin score is iconic and amazing, but Keith Emerson, yes, that Keith Emerson, did a pretty good job on the score for Inferno, the second part of the Three Mothers trilogy. And so let's play out with a little bit of his Mater Tenebrarum. And as always, don't forget to wake up heavy.
Immagine,